Next, we have Uri Kolodny from Starkware, who came all the way from Israel, I believe. So thank you, Uri.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi. Hi, good morning, everyone. I understand yesterday started with a messianic presentation. I'm not going to try and top that. This is going to be a standard blockchain story. So I'm one of the co-founders of Starkware and CEO, and I'm here to tell you about our sort of path, starting from Ethereum layer 1, building layer 2 offerings, and the road ahead for layer 3. So Starkware was incorporated in 2018. We're an Israeli company. 140 people, raised a fair bit of funding. And we're very proud of our scientific and engineering roots. Eli, my co-founder and long-time friend, co-inventor of Starks, also a founding scientist of Zcash. His PhD advisor, Avi Wigdersen, who's one of the giants of complexity theory, Shafi Goldwasser, on our advisory board, one of the co-inventors of zero-knowledge proofs going all the way back to the 80s, and Noam Nissan, who's actually here in the audience, arguably the creator of algorithmic mechanism design, and the person at Starkware these days who's working on decentralizing the prover network, amongst other things. Not only that, I think there's a fair bit of expertise in company building and engineering at Starkware, and I think that's sort of allowed us to progress at the pace with which we've been moving. Let's talk about Starknet, about the permissionless layer 2 that we're building. We'll talk about the technology, the roadmap, and the ecosystem that has evolved, and we'll step back to sort of the origins of this whole thing, and then jump forward to where we're headed. So layer 2s, I think, all sort of showed up in order to solve Ethereum's scale problem. And in this regard, at Starknet, we're sort of very proud of the results we've achieved to date. This is from StarkScan, one of the block explorers for Starknet. This is from a few days ago. In fact, we've broken this record on Thursday, and it's 126 transactions per second. Far and away, I think, of course, far exceeding Ethereum, but far away better throughput capacity than any other layer 2 out there today. In building Starknet, one of the fundamental decisions we've made was to turn away from the EVM, to start afresh. And that has allowed us, we basically approached this, a couple of years back. We approached this as, at the time, as a necessity and an opportunity, and a huge risk that we took. As we see it, it has paid off very handsomely to date. And one of the nice things about it is that you can start afresh and do all sorts of things that were perhaps a missed opportunity in Ethereum and elsewhere, try and do them right. And one of those things is account abstraction. And so with account abstraction on Starknet, as we like to say, account abstraction is not a first-class citizen, it's the only citizen. There are no EOAs at all. And this makes for a network where abstraction of fees, of the signature, of the nonce, of all dimensions of the transaction is feasible. And this opens up, in terms of UX and security, this opens up applications well beyond the realm of the blockchain ecosystem as we see it today. And I often like to think about it as something that takes it away from, say, my hands and puts it into the hands of folks like my parents, okay? That they can use something like Face ID on their smartphone, and this has been demonstrated, in fact, being used in applications on Starknet today. And that makes for a far simpler UX. It makes for a far safer interaction with your assets on the network. In building Starknet, when we first approached this, actually before building Starknet, we started out with representing business logic as a set of polynomials. So this is sort of the basic starting point for us going back to 2018. And it very quickly became apparent that this is not the way to actually build products, and that this really gets in the way of feature velocity. And so a couple of our engineers at Starkware, Lior Goldberg and Shachar Papini, co-invented Caro a few years ago. And this is a quote from Moody Salem, something that makes me very proud. Moody is one of the sort of the lead Solidity developer for Uniswap. This is like the cathedral of Solidity code on Ethereum. And a few months ago, he started building on StarkNet. Actually, a few days ago, he deployed Ikubo, which is next generation AMM on StarkNet. And from our perspective, we set out, the purpose initially was to build a programming language that abstracts away ZKP for developers. So it spares them the need to dive into that and allows them to focus on the application they want to build. I think that in the process, we ended up with a smart contract language, which is actually quite powerful. And in this regard, can compete with Solidity. And so we have what today I think is considered a very ergonomic and Rust-like high-level programming language. And it started from these roots of going from this quote-unquote, the metaphor is one from hardware, right? That the polynomials being some sort of ASIC representation, some hard-coded representation of the business logic that you're starting with, and taking this to Cairo, which is sort of the CPU approach to sort of representing this logic. And the results in terms of the efficiency and scale of the network are quite impressive. We, on a regular basis, I think at this point, every couple of hours, submit a proof to Ethereum, something in the vicinity of 200, 300,000 transactions. And in gas per transaction, this is Ethereum gas, we are at sub 50 gas per transaction. Just to put this in perspective, an ERC20 transfer on Ethereum is 80,000 gas. Okay, so this is a very significant improvement in terms of scale. The roadmap ahead, our focus over the past several months up till the deployment of version 12 a few weeks ago was on improving the throughput and latency of the network. As you saw, we've achieved some significant improvements there. We're continuing to push that envelope. We're aiming to get to the many hundreds and thousands in the not too distant future. The next milestone is reducing transaction costs. We believe we can cut transaction costs by a couple of orders of magnitude with the next version of StarkNet, which is due end of September. The intent there is to introduce Volition. Volition is this hybrid data availability mode where the developer and the user can choose where data resides, whether it's on-chain on Ethereum or off-chain in this context. Data will reside actually with the StarkNet sequencers. Next up after that, before the end of the year, is introducing fee market. This is to allow for better UX in the presence of congestion, basically allow people who are willing to pay to get priority processing in the queue. And Paymaster, which is essentially harvesting the benefits of account abstraction to allow for business logic that we're accustomed to seeing in the context of Web 2 and have been unable to benefit from in the context of blockchain applications. So we talked about the technology, about the roadmap. I want to talk about the ecosystem, which in a way, one necessary condition for the creation of this ecosystem that we're very, very sort of excited by is the complete sort of dearth of any infrastructure that was forced upon us by the decision to go with something which is not the EVM and by introducing Cairo. And so initially this sort of got a lot of sort of curious and non-standard engineers involved, and they would show up and look at this ecosystem, and they basically in search of tools that they could work with, and they're building their applications. And there was nothing. There was really nothing a couple of years ago. And those folks sort of jumped in and started building those tools themselves. And for them, I think it became, from a sort of a very challenging position, also became a very exciting opportunity to build the infrastructure that they wanted to see in production being used by others. And the result of that is this a plot from, this is Electric Capital. They have this developer report that they put out. They're actually not one of our investors. Basically what this shows is that StarkNet, in terms of as a developer ecosystem, and I want to emphasize as a developer ecosystem, and a lot of the discussion around these things is sort of ends up focusing on users, et cetera. We're sort of very, very focused on the developers. StarkNet, it seems, is on the path to being one of the fastest, hopefully the fastest growing ecosystem in the developers, sort of as a developer community in the blockchain space. What we got out of that is an ecosystem which is fairly decentralized already today. Okay, and here there's just some listing in different dimensions of the infrastructure, and I'll get to some exciting news that we announced over Twitter a few days ago. This is very important from our perspective in terms of getting credible neutrality from this public good infrastructure. And this activity is coordinated by the Starknet Foundation, headed by Diego Oliva, and they're putting in place development partnerships with teams who are building all this infrastructure. So let's sort of look back at the origins of what we're doing, and the reason is, well, A, because we're proud of it, but B, because in many ways, certainly in the context of innovation, I think we're very far from being done innovating in the space as an ecosystem of developers. And unlike what they say in the context of ETFs, and funds, that past performance is not indicative of future performance, I think that in the context of innovation, actually it's fairly indicative that the teams who have innovated time and time again are likely to continue doing so. So of course we started, standing on the shoulders of the Ethereum giants, and the Stark paper in 2018 came out. The first thing we did with that, basically because we had no other choice, because defining business logic as a set of polynomial constraints was a very risky and complicated thing. We started with a SaaS offering. This is Stark X. And so that was the first thing we did. Then realizing, as I mentioned, that this can't continue. Cairo was sort of an invention that allows us to accelerate our movement, and that opened up a whole range of things. So it opened up the ability to build Sharp out as a service. Sharp stands for shared prover. If you can prove Cairo code for one application, you can prove Cairo code for another application. You can also prove their concatenation. Independent, disparate applications, you can prove them all with a single proof, and this results in much lower marginal cost for a new application coming into this service, from day one benefiting from the marginal cost of the entire Sharp ecosystem. This has been in production for a good while now. Of course, with that, we could build out Starknet. Cairo is the smart contract language for Starknet, but it's all Starknet, the virtual machine itself, is written in Cairo, and so its state transitions are proven. And the last thing in this context is recursion. And recursion also in production for a good while now. Recursion is one of those, in the context of Starknet, is one of those rare examples of something where both latency and throughput were improved by this. Okay, so instead of proving, say, 100,000 transactions in a single batch, in a single proof, you split this up into a whole set of smaller batches. You prove those in parallel. And then the next step, the recursive step, you prove that you've verified these proofs, and so on and so forth. And the final frontier, we'll hear about this in some more detail, is layer 3. We'll get to that in a minute. So battle hardened. So why does battle hardened matter in this context? Ben talked about this, and I think the community is well aware of this. These systems, you can audit them, you can argue, you can formally prove, you could hope, but the passage of time and value in this context, this sort of effectively an open bounty program, and in that regard, the more people use it, the more time lapses without any sort of catastrophes or any glitches, the safer we all feel. And this software stack has been used for the settlement of over $1 trillion, over 500 million transactions, and that gives us confidence that it has strength and resilience. It has saved a fair bit of money in terms of layer 1 fees to date as well. So what's the road ahead? So we'll talk about app chains, the move to layer 3, and then some exciting news for the rest of this week. So what are app chains? So conceptually, we have in practice, we have a verifier smart contract deployed on Ethereum, and the public Starknet running on top of it, thanks to the services of Sharp, the shared prover. Its state transitions are proven and verified on Ethereum, and so the network progresses. You can take this software stack and instantiate independent instances of it. These we call Starknet app chains. And these would serve independent applications. And all these would have the benefits of the public chain, all the benefits that sort of the Starknet stack offers one. But it would also give you a whole bunch of benefits that are particular to app chains. And these, I think, in a general form, could be thought of as giving applications greater control of many, many different dimensions of the software stack and allowing them to move. It's not only in the operation of the network, meaning it's not only an application, and this was sort of the initial motivation for the folks who came to us to talk about app chains. People who said, I can't live on the public app chain because I'm building something in DeFi and I can't have some noisy NFT project disturb my operation on a Friday afternoon. I need my own environment. That was sort of the initial motivation, but very quickly they and we started appreciating the fact that they get much better control on all sorts of parameters in the design of the system itself, okay? And this is something that they care for deeply. So obviously, you know, it's not all good. There are some disadvantages, and the main disadvantage is that you walk away from a public network, you give up liquidity, and you give up composability. I think this is actually something that not a lot of people understand and appreciate just yet. I think that, and it's interesting to observe this over the years. When we first started serving DYDX, a lot of folks told us this walled garden approach, you know, that's going to die, that's never going to happen. And in fact, for a while, people did sort of put a huge premium on composability. It's, you know, it's oscillating over the years in a very interesting fashion. I think what we're going to see is actually not a one-directional movement, meaning I think there are going to be applications who bet on going for their own app chain, hoping that they're going to get enough liquidity, hoping they're going to get enough action on their own. And they may succeed and they may not. And those who fail, you know, may end up going back to the public chain. And I think we're also going to see all sorts of hybrid interactions, meaning applications that have their own app chain but also have some beachhead that they maintain and operate on the public chain that allows them for smoother operation. So the first app chain actually is now in closed beta. This is, was built by Paradex in close collaboration with us over the past 6 months. Paradex, Paradigm Options are, I think, the largest player on Deribit. And so they've concluded that they want to build a self-custodial system, starting with perpetuals, basically take on DYDX. And they're doing this on a StarkNet app chain. I think following perpetual contracts, I think they expect to expand to other offerings, but that's the starting point. Layer 3, so in December of late 2021, we actually articulated the concept of Layer 3 and the term. And this is a fairly simple idea. App chains, instead of being verified in a smart contract on Ethereum, if they're verified on a smart contract on a Layer 2, then one could conceivably think of them as having moved one layer up to Layer 3. And we expect that to happen over time. And the reason is that it gives them almost all of the advantages of a Layer 2, just even lower cost, even greater scale. And that, I think, is something that applications will eventually want. That's not our focus at the moment, meaning I think our focus at the moment is exploring the design space for app chains. And when the time comes and when the need arises, allow them in a very seamless fashion to move up to Layer 3. That's sort of up till now. So for this week, we announced a few days ago that we're open sourcing our prover called Stone. There will be a workshop at the Starknet Summit that's this Thursday in San Francisco, and a walkthrough session with Lior Goldberg and Gidi Kempfer, two of our lead engineers. And the rest of this week, there's the Starknet Summit that I mentioned on Thursday. Eli is giving a talk here tomorrow. Noam is giving a talk on Wednesday. We have a hacker house. I think it's full up with about 80 some people, but if anyone's interested, let me know. There's a code on my back as well. So, and then there's a base camp, which is basically a training program running for a couple of days, the first sort of in-person one. That is all. And of course, Starknet.io has a fair bit of information for all those who are interested. Happy to answer any questions you may have. Please. I'm sorry. I could talk about it. I think the intelligent presentation would come probably from Noam. Noam, do you want to say a few words about that?
There will be a talk and a workshop on Thursday.
Yes, please.
There. I thought I would see something here in the presentation, but maybe it's too separate. You consider it separate, but can you say what the status and intersection of the roadmap is for Kakarot?
For Kakarot. So Kakarot is a beautiful project that started from, there's an exploration team building out all sorts of exciting new ideas in the Starknet ecosystem. And one of them is Kakarot. Kakarot is basically a team that emerged from this effort. In fact, they started a company and are funded and off to the races. They're using Cairo to implement the EVM. Remarkably, I think they took like 10 weeks to implement all of Ethereum's opcodes. I think they will start their life as, well, hopefully they'll get to run as a layer 3 very soon on top of public Starknet.
So do you still expect for people that are using the EVM sort of layer that you guys have built, that's going to still be recommended, or is
We're not in we're not so much in the business of recommending in this regard, meaning I think there's an abundance of EVM layer 2 offerings. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think at this point we're the only I think Aztec, decided to forego the layer 2 path and become a layer 1. There's Alio and Minites, but they're layer 1s. If I'm not mistaken, all the other layer 2s are EVMs. Both the Optimistic and the ZK. I think so. I think Aztec formally announced it, but I may be wrong. Anyway, but the point is that for many people, being able to take their Solidity code and deploy it, quote unquote, everywhere, I think that's one of the reasons we're not doing it, because deployed everywhere, I think, is a very sort of tricky statement, right? Because you're always limited by sort of the weakest link in terms of capacity in this chain. If you want code that actually can run on Ethereum, you're not really harvesting the benefits of these things. So I think there may well be people who choose to deploy on Kakarot as one of these EVM environments. Starknet itself is offering something different. I'm sorry, I apologize. Yeah, the question was Kakarot and how it fits into this program. And Kakarot is the ZK EVM implementation written in Cairo, and my response was that that's, from our perspective, another application of Cairo. By the way, one of the announcements you'll hear later this week, the app chain is not sort of the only product offering that one can conceivably do. Sharp itself could be externalized to outside parties, and in fact, there will be an announcement related to storage proofs, hint, hint, on Thursday, utilizing Sharp. So, say for folks like Modulus Labs or others, allowing them access directly into Sharp is another product offering that we find interesting. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, I guess like from a developer perspective, can you explain the trade-offs between building a layer 2 app chain versus building like the layer 3 on top of Starknet?
So an app chain, I'm not sure that's how I would phrase it. So the question was, from a developer's perspective, the trade-off between building your own app chain and building a layer 3. So I'm not sure I would phrase it thus, meaning from our perspective, it's do you build your own application and deploy it on the public chain, or do you aim for your own app chain? And that app chain maybe can start its life as a layer 2, eventually will likely drift up to layer 3 just to cost you, to save you some money or your users some money. And the trade-offs, I think, are between a public chain which has a whole bunch of users and liquidity and action and wallets and all that going on, and having control over all sorts of parameters, block size, frequency, your own token, whatever it is. Yeah. Please.
What are the trust assumptions of the layer 3s? So are they like controlled by some trusted
Trust assumptions of the? Of the layer 3. Let me put it this way. Right now, StarkNet is still operated by a single sequencer and prover, operated by Starkware. The plan is over the next 12 months or so to open it up. In this regard, we are, I think, in an identical position to the other layer 2s. I think that to the extent one considers the layer 2 to be fully permissionless, and that's a very oversimplified statement, of course, right? Because it will take them a very long time to become as permissionless as Ethereum, or as decentralized as Ethereum. Then that's essentially the trust assumption you're making. Meaning you're assuming that the layer 2 will remain independent and resilient and open and permissionless. Yeah, I'm saying, but the layer 3 assumes the existence and independence of a layer 2. I think that's the main trust assumption that I would consider being sort of thrown into the mix as you migrate from a layer 2 app chain to a layer 3. How am I with time? 5 minutes. Yes. Yes, please.
You kind of drive by it, but I'm curious to hear more about volition, where you can choose how you deal with data availability, and how you guys think of the security versus cost trade-off for that kind of product.
So we were the I think that's a very interesting space. In 2021, when we introduced Validium is strictly off-chain data. Okay, we were attacked in religious terms. Okay, for heretics. And it was sort of crazy and it was sort of absurd. We said, look, guys, this is a possibility. You can run, at the time it was for StarkX. You can run it in on-chain mode, which DYDX chose to do. You can run it off-chain. It's the application's choice. We're just giving and at the time we published sort of a post about sort of the data availability design space. Volition being some hybrid a middle ground. And when I say hybrid middle ground, even without answering the question, where does the off-chain data reside in the context of Validium, this is, for StarkX today, there's a data availability committee, and there's a quorum that needs to sign attesting that they have the latest data, and the public trusts them to publish this in the context of some censorship attack. But regardless of the question where the off-chain data resides, the intent is to give developers the ability to make some decisions in this regard, and then users, consequently, to make some of their own decisions. So for example, I'm making this up, the application builder can decide that transactions involving more than yay many ETH by default go on-chain, and those below some threshold by default go off-chain, and users, of course, can choose to accept that or override that, etc. That's the intent. I think we already know, for example, that the design we have in mind may be better catered to gaming than to some particular needs in the DeFi space. But it's very clear that it's a very rich design space, and we're very eager to explore it. So if you have some crazy ideas, or if you have some ideas, don't consider them crazy. Come and talk to us about them. Yeah, please.
Yeah, it's kind of like a follow-up question on the last one. So what do you think are the differences between the L3s and L2 Validiums? Basically, like, what are the differences, and what would be kind of the more mainstream solutions for all those independent apps to be going forward?
I'm not sure I would sort of focus on the difference between L2 and L3 in the context of the off-chain data availability. So in Volition, as it stands today, the intent is for the sequencer to hold on to the L2 sequencer to hold on to the off-chain data. Now it is your choice as a user to say, I trust the sequencers or not, or in the context of my app chain, there's some permission set of sequencers, or one day a permissionless set of sequencers, and I trust them, or I want the data on-chain. We'll see. But I'm not sure that as I see it, it is a sort of strong function of the question of whether you reside on layer 2 or layer 3.
So I guess also kind of asking this question from another perspective, like so you guys is tailored for that.
Okay, and the question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so what's your take on what's kind of data service that's needed for those applications?
I can say with certainty that strict roll-ups on-chain data, applications and users have voted resoundingly that that's not the only solution that they need. In fact, they cannot afford that. And even if they did, everyone crowding Ethereum, that's not going to fly. So.